The woman brings him a bowl of porridge and sets it at the far end of the table, far away from him. That's how they feed someone they're afraid of. She doesn't look him in the eye. But he looks at her bandaged shoulder and smells a sweet, heavy scent wafting from beneath the bandage. He is a surgeon with 20 years of experience, and he understands. 5 more days and this woman will die. First comes the pain. Dull. It spreads from her right side throughout her body. Then the smell. Sour sweat. Rancid oil. Fermented herbal decoction. This isn't a hospital. Hospitals smell of bleach and coffee from the vending machine. This place smells like a basement. Jang Ujin opens his eyes. Above him is a low wooden ceiling with patches of dampness. Rough beams. They don't build ceilings like this anywhere he's been in 38 years. He struggles to sit up, but his hands won't obey him. They're not his. They're thin. Dirt under bitten-down nails. His hands were broad and dry, calloused from the scalpel. These hands have never held a scalpel. His heart is pounding so hard he can hear it in his ears. He brings his palms to his face. Someone else's fingers. Someone else's skin. He touches his face and doesn't recognize it. The jaw is narrower, the cheekbones lower, an old bruise on his left cheek, at least a week old. Someone hit him with their right hand while standing across from him. His brain figures this out on its own. 10 years in trauma, you never forget how to read bruises, just as you never forget how to read letters. And right then, he catches that very smell. Not porridge, not sweat. Pus. Extensive suppuration under the bandage on her shoulder. From the way she's carrying the bowl with one hand and pressing the other against her body, he understands. Fever. High. She's hanging on by sheer stubbornness. 2 more days, and the stubbornness will end. 5 more, and she'll be gone. He sits down. Her muscles are weak. Her stomach is soft. Her legs are thin. This person hasn't been alive for a long time. The woman freezes by the door, her back to him. She waits. He reads it in her back, stiff as a board. She's used to expecting only bad things from this body. He doesn't know where he is, doesn't know when, doesn't know who she is, but he knows one thing for sure. He's a doctor. 20 years, 10 in field surgery. And before him is a patient whom sepsis will kill if he doesn't intervene now. In a hoarse, unfamiliar voice, he asks her to stop. He says he needs to examine her shoulder. She turns around. There is neither anger nor surprise in her eyes, only the weariness he has seen in the wives of the dying. She asks why. He says he smells something, that it's rotting under the bandage, that without intervention there will be blood poisoning. She looks at him as if he were crazy. The healer has already treated it. The wound is closed. Everything is fine. He replies that the wound is closed on the outside, but rotting on the inside. He asks her to come closer. He says, "Please." That word is apparently not in the vocabulary of the body's former owner, because for the first time she looks him straight in the eye. He doesn't look away. She approaches, slowly, like a cat approaching a stranger. He touches the bandage and she flinches. Not from pain, from the touch. He knows this reflex too. A woman who's used to her husband's hand meaning a blow. He pulls his hand away, promises he won't hurt her. Just look. She nods. He unwraps the cloth. Beneath it, pink fused skin. A beautiful magical suture. Perfect. But to the touch, the skin around it is hot as a radiator. He presses just below it and she hisses. A cloudy, yellowish drop oozes from beneath the stitch. Pus has accumulated under the pretty patch. The healer closed the wound without cleaning out the dead tissue. The painter painted over the mold on the wall. Beautiful. Deadly. He asks for a knife. Says he'll cut open the seam, let the pus out, rinse it out, sew it up again. Right. She calls him crazy. He lay flat for a month and couldn't even make it to the bucket. Not a healer, not a herbalist. He can't do anything. He nods. It's all true about the one who was here before him. He asks her to trust him just this once. If it gets worse, she can kick him out today. She's silent for a long time. Then she brings a knife, a kitchen knife, dull, dirty. He asks for a flame. He holds the blade over the fire until the metal glows red. He asks for boiling water. He tears the edge of his shirt into a clean rag, dips it in the boiling water, and waits for it to cool. She bites her lip, not out of fear. Her shoulder throbs. Every heartbeat drives blood through the inflamed tissue. He seats her by the light. He brings the red-hot knife to the scar. He says it will hurt for about 10 seconds, and then it will be easier. She turns her head away and digs her fingers into the edge of the table. He cuts, steadily, along the old scar. The skin splits open and thick, greenish pus mixed with blood gushes out. A whole cupful. The smell is so strong that even he, who is used to it, winces. She doesn't scream. She just exhales sharply, as if from a blow to the stomach. He works quickly, clears away the pus, rinses with boiling water, cuts away the dead, gray-yellow tissue at the edges, millimeter by millimeter. She shivers with chills. He speaks calmly and quietly, that she's doing well, that it's almost over. He doesn't know if he's saying it to her or to himself. His hands remember the movements. 20 years. Thousands of wounds. His fingers feel foreign and weak, but his brain knows what to do, and they obey. No needle, no silk thread. He finds a thick fishing line in the corner. He heats it over the fire. He bends a needle from a scrap of wire. He sews slowly. His hands are shaking. His body is exhausted after 15 minutes, as if from an 8-hour operation. But the stitches lie even, one by one, just as he was taught, just as he's done 1,000 times. He applies a bandage made of boiled cloth. That's it. She looks at her shoulder, then at him. There's something new in her eyes. Not trust, far from trust, just simple human surprise. He sinks to the floor. His legs won't hold him up. He asks for that very same porridge. She hands him the bowl, bland, cold, grainy, the best meal of his life. Because he's alive. At night, he listens through the wall to her breathing, steadier, deeper. Her temperature should drop by morning, if the infection is gone, if he did everything right. He wants to panic for real. A man has been ripped from his life and shoved into a stranger's body, but panic is a luxury. He allowed himself that once, on his first deployment, when they brought in a truck with 30 wounded, and he stood there alone with his toolbox, thinking he wouldn't be able to handle it. He stood there for a minute, just one. Then he got to work. In the morning, a sound wakes him. She's walking around the room, not staggering, just walking. She stands at the table and kneads the dough with both hands. Her left hand is working. Yesterday, her face was grayish-yellow. Today, it's just pale. Her temperature has dropped. He lifts the edge of the bandage. The suture is pink. The swelling has gone down. No pus. He tells her to change the bandage twice a day. Don't get it wet. He'll remove the stitches in 10 days. She nods. Then she whispers, asking who he is. Because her husband couldn't do that. The truth is impossible. I'm a surgeon from another world. I died on a bridge in Seoul and woke up in your body. Nonsense, even for a world with magic. He says he doesn't know how to explain it, that he's changed, that he'll try to be helpful. She stares at him for a long time. Then she places a bowl of hot, fresh porridge in front of him, right next to him, not at the far end of the table. It's a tiny gesture, but he understands what it means. On the second day, he leaves the house for the first time, the village. A dozen or so crooked houses, a single dirt road. It reeks of waste and smoke. People stare at him, and their gazes weigh on him physically. An old man on a bench spits at his feet. A woman with a basket turns away. A boy shouts something and runs away. He can't make out the words, but the tone is clear. Here they hate the one whose face he bears. He walks straight through the village in 10 minutes. A well with murky water. 3 stalls with dried meat. A closed smithy. Barren fields on poor soil. And on the horizon, beyond the mountains in the sky, like a crack in glass, long and motionless, it gives off a strange, wrong kind of vibe. Like ozone before a storm, only not ozone. He returns. Soyeon is sharpening a spear in the yard, a long, heavy one with a serrated tip. She does it with the same familiarity as when he used to check his instruments before an operation. She is a hunter. The one who came before him lived off her, ate her food, slept in her house, beat her, and she fed him anyway. He asks how he can help. She says to chop wood. He chops for 2 hours. His body isn't used to it. His hands are weak. The calluses fell off long ago, and he rubs his palms raw until they blister. But he chops, because in this house, nothing belongs to him. Not the roof, not the food, not a say in anything. And the only way to earn a shred of respect is to work. By evening on the 3rd day, Soyeon sleeps without delirium for the first time in 2 weeks. He hears steady, quiet breathing. The fever is gone. 3 things: a clean knife, clean water, clean cloth. 3 things that no one in this world has thought to combine. And he lies there and thinks, if that's how all wounds are treated here, if every healer simply seals the skin over the filth, if every other hunter dies not from the beast, but from a treatment worse than the disease, then he has a job. There is meaning. There is a reason to be alive in a foreign body in a foreign world. He can save those whom everyone has written off. He falls asleep with this thought, and on the morning of the 4th day, a dying man is brought to their door. His name was Tae Moon Ho, a hunter, 31 years old. They carried him through a door that had been taken off its hinges. 2 men, one young and pale, the other older with trembling hands. They set the door with the body down right on the ground by Soyeon's porch, and the younger one said that Moonho was wounded, that the healer from Upper Hill had refused to go to Pumpkin Ford, that the nearest doctor was a 3-day journey away, that they'd heard Soyeon's wife was dying from a wound and then suddenly wasn't, and maybe the one who'd cured her would take a look at Moonho as well. Ujin stepped out onto the porch. He looked down. Moonho was lying on his back. His face was gray. His lips were bluish. His breathing was rapid and shallow. On his stomach lay a rag soaked through with brown blood. Ujin crouched down beside him. He lifted the rag. A wound. Penetrating. In the lower right quadrant of the abdomen. A clean cut, about a finger's length. The edges were ragged. Something had gone in and come out. A claw, or a tooth, or a thorn from some creature from the rift. The skin around the wound was hot and taut. His stomach was swollen, hard. He pressed to the left of the wound, and Moonho groaned without regaining consciousness. Ujin withdrew his hand. Muscle guarding, distension, peritonitis. The intestines are damaged. Contents in the abdominal cavity. Every minute counts. In Seoul, he would have called an anesthesiologist and gone to an operating room with sterile lights and instruments and monitors and an assistant who knew his every move. Here he had a kitchen knife, fishing line, and boiled water in a pot. He looked at the two men. They stood there waiting, as if awaiting a verdict. He looked at So-yeon. She was standing in the doorway, her left arm in a sling, her right hand on the doorframe. She was looking at Moon-ho, and he could tell she knew him. Something in her face flinched. He asked who this man was. She said he was a neighbor, that they used to go on raids together before she got married, that he had a wife and a daughter. He nodded. Then he said he needed a table, a big one, a sturdy one, light, lots of light, water, all of it, fire, and someone who wouldn't faint at the sight of blood. So-yeon looked at him for a long time. Then she turned and went inside. 10 minutes later, the kitchen table stood by the window. She pulled back the curtain so the light would shine directly in. A pot was boiling on the hearth. A second one was warming up. She found 3 oil lamps somewhere and placed them around the table. The younger of the two men helped carry Moon-ho to the table. The older one left. He couldn't bear to watch. Ujin didn't blame him. He'd seen surgeons with 20 years of experience turn green at the sight of certain wounds. To each his own. He heated the knife. He washed his hands in boiling water. It hurt. His skin turned red. But it was cleaner than soap. He looked at So-yeon and said he needed her help, that she would hand him cloth and water and keep the wound open when he told her to. She asked if he had lost his mind. He said maybe, but they didn't have time to discuss it because Moon-ho would die in 3 hours, if not 2. She stood beside him. He began. The first incision. The knife entered the skin, and he heard the younger man at the door gasp. He didn't turn around. No distractions. His hand guided the knife steadily, along the white line of the abdomen, through the skin, through the subcutaneous fat. A thin layer. This man was thin. Everyone here was thin. Through the muscle layer. The muscles parted. The peritoneum. He cut it open, and a smell wafted from the wound. Sharp. Sour. Intestinal contents. He'd seen this dozens of times. The same smell every time. Every time, the same moment when you have to stop breathing through your nose and start breathing through your mouth. So-yeon turned away. He told her not to look away, told her he needed her eyes. She turned back. She turned pale, but stood her ground. He worked with his hands, parted the loops of intestine, looked for damage. He found it, the small intestine, a laceration the size of a fingernail. Contents were oozing into the abdominal cavity through it. He pinched it shut with his fingers. He asked for thread. So-yeon handed him the fishing line. He sutured it. His hands were shaking. This body was weak. His fingers wouldn't obey him with the precision he was used to. But the suture held. Not perfect, functional. He tied off the fishing line. Checked it. It held. Now for the rinse. He poured boiling water into the open abdominal cavity, liter after liter. He rinsed. Washed out the pus and contents. So-yeon handed him the water in silence. Jug after jug. She understood the rhythm, understood what he needed and when, without words. He worked, and she worked beside him, as if she weren't doing this for the first time. A hunter. She was used to working in a team, used to reading her partner's movements. It was just that before, her partner had been a man with a spear, and now, a man with a knife. The flushing took half an hour. He examined the cavity. Clean as it could be under these conditions. No other damage. A single wound in the small intestine. Lucky. A centimeter to the left, and it would have been the aorta. and Moonho would have died out in the field. He began to close it up, layer by layer, the peritoneum, muscles, skin. He stitched and felt his vision darken with fatigue. This body wasn't built for such strain. The old Ujin had been bedridden for a month. His muscles had atrophied. His stamina was at 0. He finished the suture and sat down on the floor. Just like that. His legs buckled and he sat down. Soyeon stood over him and over Moonho, looking back and forth between them. Ujin said they needed to monitor him. If his temperature didn't rise by morning, there was a chance. If it did rise, he would operate again. She asked what operate meant. He realized that word didn't exist here. He said to cut open and fix the inside. She nodded. He asked for food. She brought it. He ate while sitting on the floor next to the table where the man lay whom he had just stitched up with a kitchen knife and fishing line, in a world without antibiotics, without anesthesia, without electricity. Night. He didn't sleep. He sat next to Moonho and checked every hour. Pulse, breathing, skin temperature, stomach, soft or hard, bandage, dry or wet. By midnight, Moonho groaned and opened his eyes. Cloudy, confused. Ujin gave him water. A sip, slowly. Told him to lie still, not to move. Moonho asked where he was. Ujin said he was at home, that everything would be fine. Moonho closed his eyes and fell asleep. He hadn't lost consciousness. He'd fallen asleep. There's a huge difference. Toward morning, Moonho's wife arrived, a small woman with red eyes, holding a girl of about 5 in her arms. She entered quietly. She looked at her husband. He was breathing steadily. His complexion looked slightly better. She turned to Ujin and fell to her knees. He stood up. He lifted her up. He told her not to. He said it was too early, that the next 3 days would decide everything, that if he didn't run a fever, he would survive. She cried quietly. The little girl in her arms looked at Ujin with wide eyes and didn't cry. Children don't cry when children freeze. He knew that too. He'd seen it hundreds of times. By the evening of the second day after the operation, Moonho asked for food. There was no fever. His stomach was soft. The incision was clean. Ujin gave him broth. Only broth. No solid food for 10 days. He explained this to his wife. She listened as if it were a revelation. In this world, after a person was wounded in the stomach, they shoved a bowl of porridge at him and wondered why he was dying. On the 5th day, Moonho sat up in bed. On the 7th, he stood up. On the 10th day, he went out into the street and his daughter ran beside him, holding his finger. The village was silent. They all knew that Moonho was dead. They had seen the wound. They had seen the color of his face when they carried him to the door. Every one of them knew that a penetrating abdominal wound was a death sentence. And yet, there he was, walking down the street, alive. Thin and weak, but alive. And none of them were looking at Moonho. They were looking at Soyeon's house. At the house where the man they despised lived. The man who didn't work, beat his wife, and lived off others. And who, now, for reasons unknown and in a way no one could fathom, had pulled his neighbor out of the grave with his bare hands. The old man who had spat at his feet when they first met came to the door that same evening. He said nothing. He placed a sack of root vegetables on the threshold. He stood there for a moment. Then he left. The next day, a woman came with a basket, the very same woman who had turned away from him on the street. She brought eggs, 6 of them. She set them down. She left. No one said thank you. No one said he was doing a good job. they just brought food. In this world, that was apparently the thank you. Ujin sat on the porch and looked at the sack of root vegetables and the 6 eggs and thought that this was the beginning. Small, fragile, but a beginning. Soyeon came out and sat down next to him. Not close, at arm's length. She was looking at the food too. Then she said that they were afraid of him. Not that they hated him like before. Afraid. Because what he does looks like witchcraft. He said it wasn't witchcraft. She asked, "Then what is it?" He thought for a long time. Then he said it was knowledge. Just knowledge. About how the body works, about what's inside, about what kills and what heals. She asked how he knew that. Again, he couldn't tell her the truth. He said he didn't remember, that after his illness, things appeared in his head that hadn't been there before, that it was as if someone had put a book inside his head. She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But she didn't argue. She had gotten used to the strangeness over the past week, got used to the fact that the man next to her spoke in different words and held his spoon with his other hand and looked at her without that dull, angry gaze she had known for 2 years. Getting used to it didn't mean accepting it, but it was enough for a start. 3 days after Moon-ho got back on his feet, another one arrived. A hunter named Je Ki-ho, young, 20 years old, a wound on his forearm, magically healed 2 months ago. His hand doesn't work. His fingers wouldn't bend. The healer said it was a curse and that he had to accept it. Ujin examined the arm, a scar from the healed wound. Beneath the scar, the tissue was hard, adhesions. Scar tissue had grown onto the tendon and was blocking movement. Not a curse, just incompetent treatment. He explained to Kiho what needed to be done, that he would make a small incision, free up the tendon, then every day he would have to work out his arm, bend and straighten it through the pain. A month, maybe 2. Kiho asked how much it would cost. Ujin said, nothing at all. Kiho didn't believe him. In this world, everything had a price. Even air cost something. Ujin said that later, when his arm was working again, Kiho would help him with something. Build something or fix something. Kiho agreed. The operation took 20 minutes. A small incision, a heated knife, freeing the tendon from scar tissue, rinsing, stitching, a bandage. Kiho was moving his fingers while still on the table. Not fully, but he was moving them. For the first time in 2 months. He looked at his fingers, and his face wore an expression Ujin had seen 1,000 times. A man who had regained what he thought was lost. Nothing is stronger than that face. Not gratitude, not tears, not words. Just the face of a man who can clench his fist again. A week later, 2 more came in. One with a chronic shoulder dislocation that no one could fix. Ujin fixed it in 30 seconds. A classic move. Lever, twist, click. The hunter screamed for half a second, then raised his arm above his head and laughed. The second was an old man, not a hunter, a local resident with a lump on his neck. A big one, the size of a fist. Everyone said it was a curse. Ujin looked. He felt it. Soft, movable, clear edges. Not a curse, a lipoma, a benign fatty tumor. He explained that it wasn't dangerous, that it could be removed but didn't have to be. The old man asked to have it removed. He said his children were afraid of it. Ujin removed it, 20 minutes. Local anesthesia using a decoction of the bark that Soyeon had used for her headaches. Not anesthesia, but better than nothing. A stitch, a bandage. The old man felt his neck. Smooth. He began to cry. He was 60 and for the past 10 years, he'd thought he was cursed by monsters, that a curse was eating him from the inside. And now, a man whom the whole village considered a worthless drunk had cut open his neck and pulled out a lump of fat, and it turned out that was all there was to it. That there was no curse. That he was just a man with a lump of fat. Ujin watched at the old man crying and thought, what's missing here isn't medicine, it isn't tools, it isn't magic. What's missing here is knowledge. Basic elementary knowledge. The stuff you learn in the first year of medical school. What a wound is, what an infection is, what pus is, why dirty hands kill, why boiled water saves lives. In his world, every student knew this. Here, no one knew it. And people were dying, not from monsters, not from fractures, from ignorance, from dirty bandages and wounds covered over with pus, and fear of what can be explained in 3 words. He returned home, sat down at the table, asked Soyeon for charcoal and a piece of light-colored cloth. She gave it to him. He began to write. A list. A long one. Everything he needed to treat people properly, not on a kitchen table by lamplight. Needles. Thin. Steel. Thread. Silk or linen. Thin and strong. Knives. Several. Different sizes. Sharpened. Alcohol, or something that can replace it. Strong alcohol. Fabric. Clean. Plenty of it for bandages. Water. Constant access to clean, boiled water. A place. Separate. Clean. With good lighting. Not the kitchen. An assistant, at least one, who can hand him a tool without fainting. Soyeon stood behind him and read. He hadn't heard her approach. She read the list and said that half of it couldn't be found in Pumpkin Ford. He said he knew. She said a blacksmith from Lower Threshold could make the knives. That an old man on the southern outskirts distilled alcohol. That fabric could be bought if they had money. He asked if they had money. She paused. Then she said they had a little, saved in case they had to leave. He realized she'd been saving that money to escape from her former Ujin. He said he wouldn't take it, that he'd find another way. She looked at the list, then at him. She returned 3 days later, with fabric. 2 large strips of unbleached linen, rough but clean. He asked where it came from. She said she'd traded for it with a merchant on the road. She didn't say what she'd traded it for. He didn't ask. He understood that in this world, a hunter with a wounded shoulder and a husband who was a disgrace didn't have much of value to trade. Whatever she had given up, she had given it up so that he could continue. He cut the fabric into strips, boiled them, dried them in the sun, stacked them. Now he had bandages, real ones, clean ones. The next day, Park Ara came. He had seen her before on the street, short, curly hair peeking out from under her headscarf, a notebook made of stitch sheets tucked into her belt. In her hand was a quill she was constantly chewing on. She was 19. She was the daughter of the late pharmacist, the only literate person in the village under 40. She didn't come as a patient. She came with a question. She asked why he was heating the knife. He looked at her. In the last 2 weeks, not a single person had asked him that question. Everyone watched, everyone saw. No one asked why. They accepted the result. She wanted to understand the reason. He invited her into the house. He sat her down at the table, poured some water, and began to explain. He told her that creatures live in the air, on hands, and on objects. Creatures that cannot be seen with the eyes. Tiny. Inconceivably tiny. They get into a wound and start to multiply, and the body fights them, And this fight is called inflammation. And if there are too many of these creatures, the body loses the battle and the person dies. She listened with her mouth agape. Then she asked how he knew they existed if they couldn't be seen. Good question. Excellent question. He said that his knowledge described ways to see them, with the help of glass, special glass, magnifying glass, which isn't here yet, but maybe someday it will be. For now, you can just see the result, a sterilized knife. The wound doesn't get infected. A dirty knife, the wound gets infected. A cloth rinsed with boiling water, the bandage is clean. A dirty rag, the bandage stinks after a day. You don't need to believe in invisible creatures. You just have to do it and see what works. She took out a notebook and began to write, quickly, eagerly. The letters were crooked and hasty. He watched her and recognized himself. Recognized his 20-year-old self. When he first stepped into the operating room and realized he wanted to do this for the rest of his life. When the world around him took on a different meaning. When every fact became a brick in the building you're constructing. Ara started coming every day, in the morning, with a notebook, with questions. Why is a fever bad? Why is a fever good? Why do some wounds heal and others don't? What is blood? Why does it flow? Why does a person die if too much of it flows out? He answered, for hours. Sometimes he didn't know how to explain it without technical terms, without context, without textbooks, which didn't exist here. He explained using his fingers, using examples. He compared the body to a house. Bones are the walls, skin is the roof, blood is water in the pipes. If a pipe bursts, the house will flood. If a wall cracks, the house will collapse. If there's a hole in the roof, rain will get in and rot will set in. Ara wrote everything down. Then she reread it. Then she asked new questions. He gave her her first assignment, to make a list of all the plants that grow around Pumpkin Ford. Every plant. What it looks like. How it smells. Which parts are used. For what? She brought the list back 5 days later. 47 plants. With drawings. With detailed descriptions of smells and tastes. She had tasted each one. He told her never to do that again. That some plants are deadly. She said she knew. That she was a pharmacist's daughter and knew which ones were poisonous. He looked at the list. He found 3 plants in it that interested him. The first, the bark of a tree they called pale willow here. The locals used a decoction for headaches, salicylic acid, natural aspirin. He knew that. She asked why he was looking at an ordinary willow like that. He said that this bark was more valuable than gold if you knew how to use it. Not just a decoction. Distill it, concentrate it, make a powder. This powder reduces fever, relieves pain, reduces inflammation. 3 effects, 1 plant. Her eyes lit up. Another plant. A mold that grew on old logs in damp places. The locals considered it a plague. They removed it. They burned it. He stared at the description for a long time. Mold, greenish, on damp wood. In his world, an antibiotic had been derived from mold of the genus Penicillium that had saved more lives than all the doctors in the world combined. Here, they burned it like trash. He told Ara that this mold might be the most important medicine they would ever make. She wrote it down. He could see she didn't fully understand, but was writing everything down. Trust. She trusted him more than anyone else in this village. The third plant. Poppy. Wild. It grew in the fields beyond the village. The locals didn't use it. They considered it a weed. He knew that opium was derived from poppies, a painkiller, strong, dangerous. But in a world without anesthesia, it was the only chance to operate without the patient screaming and thrashing on the table. He told Ara that this plant needed to be harvested, carefully, that he would show her how, and that it had to be handled very carefully, that in large doses it kills. She nodded, seriously, without a smile. She understood the line between medicine and poison. A pharmacist's daughter. It's in her blood. A month had passed since the day he woke up in a stranger's body. Over that month, he had operated on Moonho. He'd cut open and cleaned out Soyeon's shoulder. He freed Kiho's tendon. He reset the hunter's shoulder. He removed the old man's lipoma. And he treated 4 more with minor wounds and chronic issues that turned out to be ordinary illnesses, not curses. 9 people, in a month. In Seoul, he operated on 3 a day. Here, every case was a battle against filth and darkness and the absence of everything. But all 9 were alive. All 9 walked around the village. And each of them was living proof that Jang Ujin was not the man he used to be. Soyeon was changing. Slowly. Like ice changes in spring. It doesn't melt right away. It just gets thinner. She no longer placed the bowl on the edge of the table. She placed it in front of him. She no longer left when he entered the room. She stayed. She began to ask questions about what he was doing. Not with suspicion, with interest. One evening, she asked why he washed his hands before every operation. He explained. The same words he had said to Are. Not invisible creatures, dirt, contamination. She listened in silence. Then, she said that this explained why Kanhu had died. He asked who Kanhu was. She said he was a hunter from her unit, 3 years ago, a wound on his leg. Not deep. The healer had treated it. A week later, the leg swelled and turned black. 2 weeks later, Kanhu died. He was 23. Everyone said it was the will of the rifts. She said it quietly, without anger, like someone who had long since grown accustomed to injustice and stopped reacting to it. But Ujin saw how she clenched her hand on her knee. He said that Kanhu had died of an infection, that the healer had closed the wound without cleaning it, that bacteria had entered his bloodstream, that it was called sepsis, that he could have been saved. A clean knife, clean water, clean cloth. 3 things. She was silent for a long time. Then she stood up, went to her room. He could hear her through the wall, not crying, not screaming. Silence. The loudest silence he had ever heard in his life. The silence of a person who had just realized that his friend had died not because it was meant to be, but because someone hadn't washed their hands. The next morning, Soyeon came out to him and said she wanted to learn. He asked what? She said everything. Everything he knew. He nodded. They started that very day. He taught her how to apply a bandage, how to determine heart rate by feeling the pulse, how to check pupils, how to tell the difference between fainting and losing consciousness, how to stop bleeding, applying pressure to a wound, a tourniquet, when to use a tourniquet and when to apply pressure. She learned quickly. The hands of a hunter, precise, strong, accustomed to weapons. Now they were getting used to bandages. Ara came every morning. Soyeon joined them every evening. He had a team now, a small one. 2 women, one with a notebook and questions, the other with a spear and silent determination. And him, a surgeon in a foreign body, in a foreign world, with a kitchen knife instead of a scalpel. And they had nothing. No space, no money, no instruments, no medicine. But they had knowledge, and 3 pairs of hands, and that was enough for now. Pak Ara becomes Ujin's first apprentice and begins taking notes. Ujin discovers local plants that act as substitutes for aspirin and antibiotics and begins building a pharmacological database. So-yeon learns the truth about the death of her comrade Kangho and asks Ujin to teach her medicine. Ujin's first team takes shape. In the 6th week in Quivenbrode, a man appeared whom no one had expected. He arrived riding a fine horse. His clothes were clean, leather boots without patches, soft leather gloves, a cloak with a silver clasp shaped like a mountain ridge, the emblem of the Ash Ridge Guild. He stopped at an inn that hadn't been an inn for a long time, dismounted, and looked around the way a person looks around when they've accidentally wandered into a garbage dump. With a slight sense of revulsion and the certainty that he wouldn't be staying here long. His name was No Jin Hae. He was the coordinator of the 3rd Southern District of Ashridge, a title that sounded impressive but meant a simple thing. He made sure that the independent hunters of the Southern Territories didn't overstep their bounds, that they paid their share, that they didn't cause trouble, that they knew their place. He came to So-yeon after noon. He knocked on the door. Ujin opened it. No Jin Hae looked at him, and an expression appeared on his face that Ujin knew well. It was the look one gives an insect on the windowsill. Not with anger, with the annoyance of having to take notice. But Jin Hae asked where the hunter Han So-yeon was. Woojin said she was in the backyard, but Jin Hae walked past without waiting for an invitation. Ujin followed. So-yeon was standing by a water barrel, washing bandages. Clean bandages that Ujin had taught her to boil and reuse. But Jin Hae stopped. He looked at the laundry, at the barrel, at So-yeon. Then he spoke. He said rumors had reached Ashridge, that someone in Pumpkin Ford was healing people. That the wounded who had been written off were suddenly recovering. That someone was cutting people with a knife and they were living afterward. He said the Ridge was interested, that if a new kind of healer had appeared here, there might be room for cooperation. He was smiling. The smile was smooth and even, like his boots. So-yeon was silent. She was looking at the emblem on his cloak, and Ujin saw her knuckles turn white against the fabric she was clutching. She knew what cooperation with the Ashcombe meant. 70% of the spoils. Control. Supervision. And if you don't agree, they leave you alone. They just stop letting you into the rifts. And you die slowly. From starvation. Woojin stepped forward. He said he was the healer, not So-yeon. But Jin Hae turned his gaze to him, slowly, with the same expression. The insect spoke up. He asked if this was the same Jang Ujin who was famous throughout Pumpkin Ford for drinking, beating his wife, and lying in bed while she fed him. Ujin said it was him. But Jin Hae smiled. He said that Combe had a proposal, that if Ujin really could heal wounds, as they say, then Combe is ready to give him a place in his clinic in Stone Harbor. A real clinic, with tools, with assistants, with a salary. There's one condition. He treats only Combe's hunters, no one else. Ujin listened. The offer made sense. From Grebnia's perspective, it was even generous. They were giving him everything he'd written on his list. Tools, a space, assistants, everything he didn't have, in exchange for a monopoly. He would be their doctor, their tool, and all those people in Pumpkin Ford, all those hunters with festering wounds and old men with lipomas who think it's a curse, all those whom Grebin had already written off, they would be left without help. He said he would think about it, but Jin Hae nodded, said he had 3 days, that in 3 days he would return for an answer, and he left. So-yeon stood and watched him go. Then she turned to Ujin. She didn't ask what he would decide. She said that if he left, she wouldn't stop him, that in Stone Harbor he would have everything, that here he had nothing, that she understood. He looked at her and thought. He thought about how in Stone Harbor he would treat wounded professionals who would be returned to duty so they could go and bring more crystals for the ridge. He would service the machine. A well-oiled, cruel machine that ran on blood and fear. And here he would treat those whom this machine spat out. The discarded, the unwanted, the doomed. Those who had neither money, nor a voice, nor hope. He remembered his first deployment, a field hospital on the border. Two sides of the conflict. The wounded were brought in from both. He didn't ask who was from where. He asked where it hurt. That's how he was taught. That's how he worked. That's how he lived. He told So-yeon he wasn't going anywhere. She looked at him, for a long time, expressionless. Then she went into the house. He stood in the yard and thought that he had just made a choice that would determine everything. If the comb wanted to get him and he refused, then the comb would want to eliminate him. That is the logic of any monopoly. If you can't buy out a competitor, you destroy them. He needed protection. No, he needed value. The kind of value that would make destroying him too costly. He needed to become indispensable, not just to the 10 people in the village, but to everyone living in the Southern Territories. He needed a clinic, a real one, not a kitchen table, not oil lamps. A real place where people come and leave alive. The next day, he gathered everyone he had treated. Moonho, Kihyo, the old man with the lipoma, 4 others, 9 people. They stood in front of So-yeon's house and looked at him. He told them he wanted to open a clinic, that he needed a building, that there was an abandoned barn on the southern edge of the village, a big one, stone walls. The roof was flimsy, but the walls were sturdy. That if they helped fix the roof and clean the inside, he would continue to treat them, everyone, for free. Moonho was the first to say he would help. He stood there, thin, with a scar on his stomach, alive. He said he had hands and an axe and that he would start tomorrow. Kihyo raised his right hand, that very one, the one that hadn't worked for 2 months. His fingers moved, not fully, but they moved. He said he would help too. The others nodded, one by one. 9 people, 9 pairs of hands. Not many, but enough to start. The work went on for 10 days. They cleared the barn of years of debris, carried out rotten boards, patched the roof with whatever they had. Stones, clay, old hides. Ujin worked alongside everyone else, carried stones, kneaded clay. His body was weak, but with each passing day it grew a little stronger. He exercised regularly, for the first time in the months this body had existed. His muscles responded. Slowly, but they responded. Ara came with a notebook and helped. She was small and couldn't carry stones, but she kept track. She measured. She wrote down what was needed. How many planks? How many nails? How much fabric for the screens? She made a list and checked it 3 times. So-yeon was silent for the first 3 days. She worked in her field. She sharpened her spear. She prepared for the raid. She didn't help. She didn't get in the way. She was just there. On the 4th day, she came into the barn, without a word, with a bucket of lime wash. She began whitewashing the walls. Lime, antiseptic. Ujin hadn't asked her to do this. She figured it out on her own. Whitewashed walls aren't for beauty. They're so you can see the dirt, so you can wipe it off, so the room would be cleaner. She'd understood this from his lessons and did it herself. He stood and watched as she applied the whitewash to the stone with sweeping strokes, evenly, quickly, like someone used to working with their hands. A hunter. A spear woman. And now she was whitewashing the walls of the infirmary. He told her she'd made a brilliant choice with the lime. She didn't turn around, but he saw her shoulders tremble slightly. By the end of the 10th day, the shed was starting to look like something. 3 beds made of planks and straw, a table in the center, large, sturdy, an operating table, a shelf against the wall. On it, jars of decoctions that Ara had prepared according to his instructions. A decoction of pale willow, concentrated. A tincture in strong moonshine for disinfection. An ointment made from animal fat with added herbal extract for healing. Primitive, rough, but better than nothing. A barrel of water stood by the door. Next to it, a fire pit for boiling. On the wall, Ara had written 12 rules in charcoal. Ujin dictated. She wrote in large letters. Wash your hands before touching the wounded. Wash your hands afterward. Boil water before washing the wound. Sterilize instruments in fire. Do not place a dirty cloth on the wound. Do not eat or drink near the wounded. If the wound smells sweet, call a doctor immediately. If the wound feels hot to the touch, call a doctor immediately. Do not give the wounded person solid food if they have a stomach wound. Do not move the wounded person if they have a back wound. Watch the color of the skin around the wound. White is bad, red is normal, black is too late. If you don't know what to do, don't do anything. Call someone who does. 12 rules. Simple. Clear. Ara read them aloud to everyone who entered the barn, like a prayer. He stood in the doorway of the new barn, his clinic, the Quiet Hearth. Ara came up with the name. She said that hearth meant warmth and light, and that quiet was because no one shouted here. Although they did shout, everyone shouted on the operating table, but she liked the name, and so did he. The Quiet Hearth, a place where people are fixed. 2 days after the opening, No Jin-hee returned, this time without a smile. He arrived with 2 people, bodyguards. You didn't need to be an expert to figure out why. 2 broad backs, 2 swords at their belts, muscles beneath leather jackets. They stopped at the entrance to the clinic, but Jin-hee walked in. He looked around, at the beds, at the shelf with the tinctures, at the rules on the wall. At the table, he read the rules. He smiled. Then he turned to Ujin and said that his answer meant a refusal. Ujin said that was correct. But Jin-hee nodded, calmly, without anger, like a man who had expected exactly that answer and already had his next move ready. He said that Ash Ridge respected freedom of choice, that no one would be forced, but that Pumpkin Ford was located in a territory supplied via roads controlled by the crest, that merchants came here along trails guarded by the crest, that if guarding the trails suddenly became too expensive and the merchants stopped coming, it would be very unfortunate. He wasn't threatening, he was informing. The difference was subtle and all the more terrifying for it. Ujin listened and recognized it. He had seen this before. In another world, in another life. Insurance companies that denied claims to clinics, officials who grant permits, suppliers who suddenly stop delivering, a system that crushes not with a fist, but with a glove. But Jin-hee left. The guards followed him. The horses' hooves clattered along the dirt road and then fell silent. Soyeon stood at the clinic door, arms crossed over her chest. Her face stony. She said it was about to begin. He asked what exactly. She said that the comb does not forgive refusals, that they would start to apply pressure. Quietly, gradually. They'll cut off trade. They'll intimidate those who help. They'll find a pretext for an accusation. That in a month or 2, there won't be any bandage cloth left in Pumpkin Ford, no food at the market, and no people at the clinic's door. Everyone will scatter. Everyone will be afraid. Because that's how it's always been. He listened. She was right. She'd lived here for 15 years. She knew how this world worked. He asked what she suggested. She paused. Then she said there was one thing that could protect them. Reputation. If the clinic became so important that people from all over the South would know about it, if the number of people he treated went from 10 to 100, if every hunter in the Southern Territories knew that in Pumpkin Broad there is a man who pulls people back from the grave, then the comb won't be able to crush them quietly. Because it won't be quiet. Because 100 surviving hunters are 100 people who will stand up and say that the comb is killing the clinic that saved them. He needs patience, lots of them, fast. He nodded. She's right. The only defense is scale. The only wall is people. He needs to treat more, faster, more visibly, so that Quiet Haven is known not only in Pumpkin Ford, so that it is known in Lower Threshold and Stone Harbor and all along the southern route. And for that, he needs something he doesn't have yet. Time, hands, and luck. Luck came a week later, and it looked like a woman with no left eye on a lame horse. Catherine Vaughan, 28 years old, former captain of the 3rd Strike Squad of the Ashcrest Guild. Red hair, tall, thin. The left half of her face was covered by a dirty bandage, beneath which the edge of a scar was visible. Her right eye was green and fierce. A cane in her hand, a knife on her belt, a cloak without an emblem on her shoulders. She'd cut it off, or it had been torn off. She dismounted at the infirmary. The horse staggered, just as exhausted as its owner. Cat tied her to a post and walked to the door. She was limping, her left leg, not broken, her knee was injured. An old injury. She went inside, and Ara, who was alone inside, stood up from behind the desk. Ara later said she felt as though the room had grown smaller, that this woman filled the space just as fire fills it, that she smelled of blood and road dust and anger. Cat looked at the cots, at the shelf with the tinctures, at the rules on the wall. She read them. She smirked. She asked where the doctor was who cuts people open and they don't die. Ara said that Ujin was at the market, that he'd be back soon. Cat sat down on a cot without asking. She just sat down and waited. When Ujin returned, he saw her and stopped in the doorway. He looked. He studied her. A bandage on her face, a black stain on the gauze. Not blood, old exudate. Several months old, not fresh. Limping on her left leg, leaning on a cane, but not fully. Pride won't let her. Right hand on her belt, near the knife. Reflex, a fighter. Skinny. Cheekbones sticking out. She hasn't eaten properly in a long time, but the muscles in her forearms are hard. She trained until the very end. He approached, said hello. She looked at him, from the bottom up, even though she was taller, because she was sitting. Then she said she was expecting someone bigger. He said everyone was expecting that. She didn't smile. She asked if he could give her eye back. He said no. She nodded, as if she were checking, as if the correct answer was precisely no. A charlatan would have said yes. She said she'd lost her eye 4 months ago, a raid into the 3rd level fissure, a creature the size of a horse with spikes instead of a tail. It struck her in the face. A spike pierced her eye socket. The healer stopped the bleeding, but the eye had drained out. Half her squad died on that raid. 4 out of 8. She dragged the rest out, with one eye, with a broken knee, along a rotten trail through the rift. 12 hours. Then the Ridge wrote her off. No need for a one-eyed captain. They gave her a pension, a small one, for 3 months. They said thanks for her service. She spent the pension in a month. Because she drank. Because when you've been a hunter for 10 years and a single blow turns you into a cripple, you drink. Then the money ran out, and she sobered up and heard a rumor about Pumpkin Ford, about a man who cuts and mends, and she thought, what if? He listened, didn't interrupt. When she finished, he asked her to remove the bandage from her face. She took it off. The left eye socket, empty, scarred over. The eyelids sewn together with a rough magical stitch. The skin around it reddish. The edge of the scar uneven. The healer closed it as best he could, not surgically, just cauterized it with mana so it wouldn't believe that he was magical stitches. The skin around it was reddish. The edge of the scar was uneven. The healer had closed it as best he could, not surgically. He just cauterized it with mana so it wouldn't ooze. He examined it. The eye was gone. He knew that. The nerve was damaged. The eyeball was destroyed. Even here in Seoul, the only option would be a prosthesis, cosmetic, not functional. But the scar tissue around the eye socket was pulling. It was deforming the facial muscles. It was getting in the way. It hurt. And it affected the right eye. Compensatory strain. The right eye was working for 2 and getting tired. Headaches, most likely constant ones. He asked if her head hurt. She said every day. He nodded. He said he couldn't restore her eye, but he could take away the pain. He could treat the scar tissue properly, release the tension. Make sure her right eye didn't overexert itself. He could take a look at her knee. She was silent. Then she asked why. He didn't understand. She explained. Why should she live without pain if there's nothing to live for? She's not a hunter. She's nothing. Trash. Written off. A function whose purpose has been disabled. He sat across from her and said nothing. He knew these people. He'd seen them. In hospitals, soldiers after amputations, firefighters after burns, people who define themselves through their work who had lost their jobs. Lost not their paychecks, lost their purpose. He didn't tell her that everything would be okay. Didn't tell her she'd find herself. Didn't say empty words that annoy more than they help. He asked her one thing. He asked if she could judge the distance to an object with one eye. She thought about it. Said she couldn't. Her depth perception was gone. She misses her mark. Can't judge distance. So she can't fight. So she can't hunt. He nodded. Then he said he'd seen people with one eye who shot better than those with 2, that the brain learns to compensate, that it takes time and training, that there are ways. Tilting the head, micro movements, sound. Shadow, shifting focus. That the human brain is the most adaptive machine in the universe and that 4 months is nothing. That it takes a year to rebuild, and that in a year she would fight differently than before. She would fight differently, maybe even better, because she would think about every movement instead of relying on reflexes. She looked at him with one eye, green and wet. She wasn't crying, the eye was just wet. She said he was either an idiot or knew that no one else knows. He said it was more likely the former, but the latter wasn't out of the question either. She stayed. He operated on her face the next day, removed the rough magical stitch from her eyelid, cleared out the scar tissue that was pulling on the muscles, treated the eye socket, stitched it up carefully, with fine stitches, so the skin would lie flat, so it wouldn't pull, so it wouldn't hurt. She lay on the table and didn't make a sound, Not a single one. A hunter, 10 years in the field. She was used to pain like she was used to the weather. Just another day when it hurts. After the surgery, he examined her knee. The ligament was damaged, not completely torn, stretched and healed incorrectly. He could have opened it up and tried to fix it, but the risk was too great. Instead, he made her a splint, a rigid one, made of wood and leather, to keep her knee in the correct position. And he gave her exercises every day, bending, extending, with weight, gradually. She did them with a fury that people usually direct at their enemies. For her, the enemy was inside her own body, and she was going to defeat it. After a week, the headaches were gone. She mentioned it casually, at dinner. She said that for the first time in 4 months, she'd woken up without wanting to smash her head against the wall. Ujin nodded. Ara jotted it down in her notebook. Kat looked at Ara and asked why she was writing everything down. Ara said the teacher had told her to, that every patient is a story, that every story is a lesson for the next patient. Kat looked at Ujin, then at Ara. Then she said they were both crazy and that she liked it here. She stayed, not as a patient, as part of the team. She started helping, in her own way, not with bandages or herbal teas. She became a guard. She walked around the clinic with a cane and a knife, watching everyone who entered. With one eye. That was enough. She had a look that made people involuntarily sit up straight and stop lying. 10 years in Ashcombe. 10 years commanding a squad of 8 hunters in the rifts where a single wrong word cost everyone their lives. She could spot a lie better than any magical detector, and she knew the ridge from the inside, knew how they worked, how they thought, how they exerted pressure. She came to Ujin in the evening, 10 days after her arrival. She sat down across from him, looked at him, said she knew about No Jinhei's visit, that the ridge wouldn't stop, that the pressure would grow, that the next step would not be a threat, but action. The merchants would stop coming, or one of the patients would suddenly decide against treatment, or a fire would break out in the clinic. She had seen it. She herself had once been an instrument of that pressure. She knew every move. Ujin asked what to do. She said they needed fighters, not an army, not a wall of swords, just people who know how to stand between the clinic and those who want to shut it down. Hunters, the discarded ones, those whom the ridge cast out. They're here, in Pumpkin Ford, all around him. Every other resident of the village is a former hunter who is written off for wounds or age or being unfit. They are broken and angry and hungry, but they know how to fight, and if given a reason, they'll fight again. Ujin said he doesn't want war. Kat said the war is already happening. It's just that so far, only one side is firing. She proposed a plan. She's training them. Taking 5, those who are capable, teaching them to work together. Not to attack, to defend. The perimeter around the infirmary, patrol routes, signals, procedures for different threats. She knew all this. She'd been leading people into the rifts and back for 10 years. Teaching 5 people to guard a barn was like teaching a kitten to drink milk. Ujin agreed, on one condition. He said that each of her fighters would have to go through him. He would examine them, heal what he could, get them back on their feet, because you can't defend the clinic if you need it yourself. Kat nodded. The first was Moonho, a healed wound on his stomach, a scar. His strength hadn't fully returned yet, but his hands still remembered the spear. Second was Kiho. His arm worked, not perfectly, but enough to hold a shield. The third and fourth were 2 hunter brothers whom Ujin had treated for chronic wounds on their legs. The fifth was Soyeon. She said so herself, without being asked. She said her shoulder had healed, that she could hold a spear, that she wouldn't sit on the sidelines while others defended what she had helped build. He looked at her. Her shoulder had indeed healed. A neat pink scar. His work. His first job in this world. He nodded. She went over to Kat. Kat was standing in the clinic's backyard, waiting. The 5 of them stood before her. She looked at each one, with one eye, green and cold. Then she said they were pathetic, and that she'd seen dead rats with more spirit. Then she said that in a month they'd be the best security in the Southern Territories, or she would personally break their legs. Training began. Every morning, Kat put them through their paces in the field behind the settlement. Running, strikes, blocks, partner drills, group drills. She yelled at them so loudly it could be heard in the infirmary. Ujin listened and smiled. Not because he liked the shouting, because Kat was shouting like someone who had finally found a purpose. She had found what she was meant to do. Not to kill creatures, to teach people not to die. That evening, after the first day of training, Ujin sat in the infirmary and counted the supplies. Bandages for 20 dressings, willow bark decoction for 10 doses, alcohol tincture for 5 washes. Not enough. Catastrophically little. If they brought in a wounded person with a serious injury tomorrow, he'd use up half the supplies in a single operation. Ara walked in, with a notebook. She sat down next to him. She said she'd found another place where mold was growing, a large log by the river. Green mold. Plenty. He looked at her. Mold. His great hope and his great fear. He knew that penicillin is derived from certain types of mold. But he's not a microbiologist. He doesn't know the exact isolation protocol. He doesn't know the concentrations. He doesn't know the dosages. He knows the principle, roughly, in general. Grow the mold on a culture medium, collect the liquid it secretes. That liquid contains an antibiotic. It might contain one, if it's the right kind of mold, if the temperature is right, if the medium is right. Too many ifs. But in a world without antibiotics, every attempt is worth any risk. He told Ari that tomorrow they would start the experiment. She took out a pen, ready to take notes. He told her what to do. Collect the mold, transfer it to bread, damp bread, in a warm, dark place. Wait, observe, write everything down. Color, smell, growth rate. Then collect the liquid from under the mold. Boil it, strain it, and try it. On a wound. A small one, not dangerous. A scratch. See what happens. Ara took notes. Her eyes were burning. She didn't know the word experiment. He explained. You do something, you see what happens, you write it down, you repeat it. You change one thing. You watch, you write it down, again and again, until you find what works. She said it was like when she used to try mixing herbs as a child. Her father scolded her. He said you couldn't change the recipes of your ancestors. She mixed them anyway, in secret. She wrote them down in her first notebook, which her father later found and took away. Ujin said her father was wrong. She looked up at him. He said that the recipes of the ancestors are the beginning, not the end. That every generation must test what the previous one left behind, add to it, correct it, improve it. That knowledge which does not grow is not knowledge, but a monument. Beautiful, useless. She sat and listened, and he saw something change in her face, as if she had been told her whole life that the sky was green, and suddenly someone allowed her to look up. He thought that for that 1 minute alone, it was worth dying on the bridge in Seoul. Then they sat and calculated how much bread was needed for the mold experiment. Soyeon peeked through the door, wet, after practice, sweat on her forehead. Her hair had come loose from its tie. She looked at the two of them, at Ara with her notebook, at Ujin with a piece of charcoal in his hand over a piece of fabric on which curved circles were drawn. She didn't say anything, but the corner of her mouth twitched. Maybe it twitched. Maybe he imagined it. She left. He watched her go and thought that it was almost, not quite, like a smile, but almost. That night he lay awake, thinking. He had a clinic, a small one, 3 beds, 1 shelf, 1 table. He had a team. Ara with her notebook, Soyeon with her spear, Kat with 1 eye and 5 fighters. He had enemies. Ashcrest. Big, strong, rich, with an army of hunters and control over the roads and trade and the rifts. He had knowledge. 20 years of surgery, thousands of operations, 1,000,000 facts in his head. Knowledge that didn't exist here. Knowledge that was as good as magic here. He had 10 fingers and 1 head and a limited number of hours in a day. He couldn't heal any faster than he did. Couldn't be in 2 places at once. Couldn't go without sleep. He couldn't go without eating. He was human, ordinary, mortal, tired. And he was the only one in the entire southern region of the continent of Harion who knew why people died from dirty wounds. The only one who could change that. He closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would have to work, teach, heal, build, think, count. Tomorrow he would have to be a doctor. As always, just like 20 years ago. Only now, not in an operating room with white walls and sterile light, but in a barn with whitewashed walls and oil lamps. The essence was the same. Keep his hands clean, keep a cool head, keep the patient alive. The rest will follow. Catherine Vaughn, former captain of the Ash Ridge and now an eyeless, guild-expelled woman, arrives in Pumpkin Ford. Ujin operates on her face and begins a rehabilitation program. Kat takes charge of training a 5-person security detail, including Soyeon and Moonho. Ara begins an experiment with mold to create a primitive antibiotic. The first real defense and supply structure begins to form around the clinic. The first outsider patient arrived in the 6th month. She was brought in on a cart. 2 men. One was driving the horse. The second sat in the back and held the woman's head on his lap. The cart stopped at the clinic at dawn. Kat was the first to get up. She went out with her cane. She looked. 1 eye, green, cold. The man from the back jumped down and said they were from Lower Threshold, that they had been traveling all night, that his sister had been written off 3 days ago, that the healer had said it was a curse and spread his hands, that they'd heard of Pumpkin Ford, of a man who cuts and mends, that they didn't know where else to go. Her name was Ryu Yeon-ha, 26 years old, a hunter swordswoman, pale to the point of blue, gray lips. Breathing 30 times a minute. Her pulse on her wrist was barely detectable. Her stomach was swollen. Not like Munoz. Worse. Bigger. Harder. Ujin asked to have her moved onto the table. He examined her. A wound on her left side, closed with a magical stitch. Fresh. 3 days. The skin around the wound was purple. Hot. A fever. High. He pressed on her abdomen and Yeon-ha screamed without regaining consciousness. He removed his hand. Peritonitis. Again. But worse than Moonho's. 3 days. For 3 days, intestinal contents, or blood, or both, had been spilling into the abdominal cavity while the mage kept the skin on top closed, like plastering a ceiling in a burning house. He turned to Ara, told her to prepare. She was already preparing. She knew. Boiling water, cloth, instruments, sterilize, lay out, order. In 6 months, she had learned the protocol like her own name. He turned to Soyeon. She was standing in the doorway, spear against the wall, hands free. He said he needed her. She approached, without a word. She stood to the left of the table, just as she did every time. Her place, her role. Serve, hold, rinse, watch. Don't look away. The operation lasted 3 hours, the longest ever. He opened the abdomen and found what he expected and feared: the spleen. Torn. Blood in the cavity. A lot. Dark. Old. 3 days old. The intestines were damaged in 2 places, one small, the other the size of a finger. The contents had leaked out. Pus. A lot. The smell was so bad that Yeonhee's brother, who was behind the wall, went out onto the street and threw up. He worked, methodically, like a machine. First, stop the bleeding. The spleen couldn't be saved. He tied off the vessels and removed it. People live without a spleen. They get sick more easily, but they live. Then the intestines. 2 stitches, one simple, the other complex. The edge was torn, the tissue was inflamed, the suture thread was hard to insert. He sewed and felt the sweat running down his face. Soyeon wiped his forehead with a cloth. He didn't ask her to. She did it on her own, because she saw that it was dripping into his eyes, because she understood that he couldn't let go of the needle. Then the irrigation, liters of water, boiled, warm. Ara brought jug after jug. Her face was serious. Her lips were pressed together. A notepad in her pocket. She would write it down later. Right now she was working. He closed it up, stitched it, applied a bandage. He sat on the floor. His legs wouldn't hold him. 3 hours. A kitchen knife, fishing line, oil lamps, and a woman who was supposed to have died 3 days ago. She was breathing, evenly. Her pulse was weak but steady. Her temperature hadn't dropped, but hadn't risen either. Equilibrium. Fragile, like ice on a spring river. The next 2 days would decide everything. He hadn't slept for 2 days. He sat by her side, changed her bandages, checked her pulse, gave her water drop by drop. Ara was on duty during the day. He was on duty at night. Soyeon came and went. She brought food, for him and Ara, silently. She set down a bowl. She left. On the second night, the temperature began to drop, slowly, but it was dropping. Ujin sat by the bed and listened to Yeonha's breathing and thought that maybe it would work out. Maybe this woman from lower threshold, whom he had never seen before, would wake up and get up and return home alive. On the 4th day, Yeonha opened her eyes. She looked at the ceiling, at whitewashed walls, at the shelf with the tinctures, at the charcoal drawings. Then she turned her head and saw Ujin. He was sitting nearby, unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes, in a stained apron. She asked where she was. He said she was safe. She asked if she was alive. He said she was alive. She closed her eyes, and 2 tears rolled down her temples into her hair. Her brother was standing behind the door and heard everything. He came in and knelt down next to the bed, took her hand, and held it. Ujin left. It was morning outside, cold, autumnal. He stood there, breathing. Ara followed him out. She stood next to him, quietly. Then she said she'd written everything down, every step, every incision, every stitch, the time, the amount of water, the dose of the decoction, everything. He looked at her, a 19-year-old girl with curly hair and a feather behind her ear, the author of the world's first surgical chart who didn't know what a surgical chart was. He told her she did a great job. She blushed and ran away. Yeonhee's brother left a week later. Yeonha stayed, not because she couldn't leave, because she didn't to. She was recovering slowly. She walked around the clinic. She helped as best she could. She swept. She washed bandages. She was quiet. Not like So-yeon, quiet from exhaustion, quiet from shock. She sat on the porch and looked at the village and the sky and the crack above the mountains and said nothing. Then one day she went up to Ujin and said she wanted to stay, that she had nowhere to go back to, that in Lower Threshold they'd written her off, that here, at least, she was needed. He nodded. The brother hadn't left alone. He'd taken a story with him. 2 weeks later, another wounded man arrived from Lower Threshold. 3 weeks later, 2 more. The rumor spread. Quietly, like water through cracks. From person to person, from village to village. There is a place, Tikovny Broad. There's a man. He cuts and mends. He gets the written off back on their feet. He pulls out the hopeless cases. Not a magician, not a healer. Just a man with a knife and clean hands. By the end of the 6th month, 32 patients had passed through Tiki Ochag. 29 survived. 3 did not. 1 was brought in too late. Sepsis. The 4th day. His organs were already failing when they laid him on the table. Ujin opened him up. He saw. He closed him up. He told the family he hadn't made it in time. They didn't curse. They didn't scream. They knew he was their last hope. And they knew he had tried. The second one died from bleeding that Woo Jin couldn't stop. An artery in the thigh, torn 3 fingers wide. He sutured. The suture thread tore through the inflamed vessel wall. The blood flowed faster than he could keep up. So-yeon held the tourniquet. Ara handed him the gauze, but there was too much blood. He lost. The patient died on the table. Ujin sat there afterward, staring at his hands. Red, wet, useless. So-yeon approached. She stood beside him, without touching him, just beside him. He said that if only he'd had clamps, if only he'd had real surgical instruments, if only he'd had silk instead of this fishing line that tears the tissue. She said he'd done everything he could. He said that wasn't enough. She was silent. Then she said that no one had done it before him, that before him, this man would have died in a ditch by the road, and no one would have even tried. That a little is still better than nothing. He didn't answer. The third one died at night, quietly, in his sleep. An old hunter about 50 years old. Ujin had been treating him for what, by all signs, was liver cancer. He couldn't say that. There was no word for cancer here. He said that something bad was growing inside and that he couldn't remove it, that he could only take away the pain. The old man nodded. He said he'd already lived longer than he'd expected. He asked for the decoction that Ujin gave for pain. Poppy seed. He drank it for 3 days. Then he fell asleep and didn't wake up. Ujin stood over his bed in the morning and thought that death was also part of his job. That a doctor who doesn't bury patients is either a liar or doesn't treat the seriously ill. That 32 and 29 is a good record. A very good. Impossible for this world. And that the 3 people he didn't save would stand over his shoulder every time he picked up a scalpel. That's how it should be. That's how it was in Seoul. It will always be so. The first patient from outside is brought to Pumpkin Ford. Ujin performs an extremely complex 3-hour operation and saves the hunter Ryu Yan-ha. Word of the clinic spreads throughout the Southern Territories. By the 6th month, 32 patients have passed through the Quiet Haven. 3 die, and Ujin faces the limits of his abilities for the first time without proper tools. The tools arrived from a source he hadn't expected. Kiho, the very same one, the 20-year-old hunter whose arm tendon Ujin had released 5 months earlier. Before becoming a hunter, Kiho had been a blacksmith's apprentice. He left because he didn't pay the bills, but hunting did. Now his arm worked, and he couldn't hunt properly, but he could forge. He came to Ujin with a piece of metal and asked what was needed. Ujin sketched it on a piece of cloth, a scalpel, thin, light, with a long handle, a blade no wider than a pinky finger, sharpened on one side. Kiho looked at the drawing. He turned it over in his hands. He said he would make it. 3 days later, he brought the first scalpel, rough, a bit thick, the edge was uneven, but it was a scalpel. Not a kitchen knife, a tool created for a single purpose, to cut flesh neatly and precisely. Ujin took it in his hands and felt his fingers recognize the shape. 20 years. Muscle memory is stronger than any magic. He asked for more. Kiho listened and drew. Clamps, 2 types, one straight for blood vessels, the second curved for tissue. A retractor to hold the edges of the wound apart. A needle, surgical, curved, with an eye for the thread. Forceps, scissors with rounded tips. Kiho looked at the drawings, shook his head, and said he didn't understand half of it, but would try. He tried, every day. He hammered away in the small forge that an old man from the southern border had lent him. He brought samples. Ujin tested them. Too blunt, too thick. The spring in the clamp is weak. It doesn't hold. Kiho would leave and come back, again and again. A month later, a set lay on Ujin's shelf. Not perfect, far from the standards of the Seoul Clinic, but it worked. A scalpel that cut, 2 clamps that held, a needle that sewed, tweezers that grasped, and scissors that cut. The first operation with the new instruments was on Yan-ha. He was removing her external stitches, the suture thread he'd sewn 3 months ago. The scalpel slid into the tissue like butter. He cut the stitches, one by one, cleanly, quickly, without a hitch. Yan-ha lay there and didn't flinch. Not because she didn't feel it, because it hardly hurt at all. He removed the last stitch and looked. A scar, long, pink, his handiwork. Yonha looked down at her stomach, then at him. Then she said that now she had a story for her grandchildren. He said that for starters, it would be nice to live long enough to have grandchildren. She almost smiled. Alongside the instruments, Ara was conducting her own experiment. Mold on bread, 20 samples, each in a separate jar, in a dark corner of the clinic behind a screen. She checked them every day. She took notes, color, smell, texture, moisture. By the 4th week, 3 samples had produced liquid, cloudy, yellowish, with a characteristic sour smell. She collected the liquid in test tubes, brought them to Ujin. He sniffed, looked at it in the light. Didn't know how to tell if it worked. There was no lab, no microscope. There were no petri dishes. There was only one way: to try it. An opportunity presented itself a week later. A hunter from Pumpkin Ford. A small cut on his hand from a knife. Not dangerous, but enough for a test. Ujin washed the wound as usual, with boiled water. Then he applied the liquid from under the mold to a clean cloth and pressed it against the wound. He changed the bandage every day. He compared it to the usual wounds he treated with boiled water and alcohol tincture. After a week, the wound treated with the mold liquid had healed 2 days faster. No inflammation, no redness, a clean, pink scar. One test wasn't enough. He knew that. Not enough to draw conclusions, not enough for certainty, but enough for hope. He told Ara to continue, to increase the number of samples, to record everything, every detail, the air temperature, humidity, type of bread, time. She nodded. Her eyes were burning. She understood she was doing something important, something no one before her had done. Not here, not in this world. She was the first. Meanwhile, Pumpkin Ford was changing. Slowly, imperceptibly to those who had lived here for years, but Ujin saw it. When he came here, the village was dying. 36 crooked houses, empty eyes, skinny children. The smell of hopelessness, which he knew better than the smell of pus, because pus can be cleaned out, but hopelessness cannot. Now it was different. Not good, but different. The clinic had a porch. Moonho had built it. A bench on the porch. People sat there, waiting for their appointment, or just sitting. Because this was a place where you could come and not be chased away. Kiho had opened a real blacksmith shop. Not just tools for Ujin, he repaired tools for hunters. He shoed horses for those passing through. Orders started coming in from lower threshold. Yonha grew stronger and began helping Kat with training. She was a swordswoman. Kat was the commander. Together they put the 5 through their paces until the dust rose in a cloud. Ara led the classes, every week, 3 times, for anyone who wanted to listen. She shared what Ujin had taught her, how to wash your hands, how to clean a wound, how to apply a tourniquet, how to tell how bad it is by skin color and breathing rate. Simple things, basics, the kind that every medic knew in his world, but no one here knew. 3 people came, then 5, then 10. Old people, women, teenagers. They listened to Ara and nodded and took notes, those who could write, while the rest memorized. She was patient. She repeated. She demonstrated. On a rag doll she had sewn herself and named patient number 0. Ujin stood to the side, watching, and thought that in 6 months he hadn't built a clinic. He had built a school. A small one. A makeshift one, with 1 teacher and 36 students. But a school. And that was more important than any operation, because he performs operations alone. But the knowledge Ara imparts will live on even if he is no longer here. One evening, Soyeon came to him. He was sitting in the clinic, writing, with charcoal on cloth, compiling what he called a field aid protocol, a checklist for someone who finds themselves next to an injured person and doesn't know what to do. Step 1. Check for breathing. Step 2. Stop the bleeding. Step 3. Don't move them if they're wounded in the back. And so on. Simple words, short, understandable, for people who can't read, for people who are panicking. Soyeon sat down next to him, silently. She watched him write. Then she said she had something to tell him. He set the charcoal aside. He looked at her. She said she had a court date in a month, a divorce. She had filed the papers 2 months before the previous Ujin died, that is, before he showed up. The papers were at the lower threshold municipal office. The court date was set. It hadn't been canceled. She had been waiting. She didn't know how to say it. Because the man standing next to her wasn't the man she was leaving. But the papers were in his name, with his face on them. He listened, calmly, just as he listened to patients who told him they had cancer, without panic, without drama, with attention. He said he understood, that she had every right, that the former Ujin deserved this divorce, that he wouldn't interfere. She looked at him, for a long time. Then she asked what he wanted. He thought about what he wanted. He wanted her to be healthy, for her to be safe, for her not to flinch when he raised his hand, for her to look at him one day and see him, not the shadow of the man who came before him. He said he wanted her to make the decision that was right for her, that he was a guest here, in this body, in this world, that he had no right to demand anything. She stood up. She stood there for a moment. Then she said she would postpone the trial, for 6 months, to see how things went. He nodded. She left. He sat there looking at his notes, and the letters blurred, not from tears, from exhaustion, or from tears. He couldn't tell. Kiho begins forging surgical instruments based on Ujin's drawings. The first test of Ara's mold extract shows results. The village begins to come alive around the clinic. Ara conducts educational sessions for the locals. So-yeon informs Ujin that she filed for divorce before he arrived and decides to postpone the trial for 6 months. Letters he by chance. In the 8th month, he was cleaning the back room of the house, the one the former Ujin had used as a storage room, dirty, cluttered with rags and broken things and empty bottles of cheap moonshine. He had been clearing it out for 3 days now. He was taking out the trash, washing the floor, whitewashing the walls, turning this room into what he had planned, a second bedroom. Because until now he had been sleeping in the same room as So-yeon, not together, she on the bed, he on a mat in the corner, 2 meters apart. 2 meters that meant everything. He wanted to give her space. He wanted her to have a room where she could close the door and be alone. Under the floorboard in the corner, he found a crack. The board lifted. Underneath was a hiding place, small, the size of a shoebox. Inside was a rag. In the rag was a bundle. In the bundle were letters, 7 of them, on cheap paper. Written in 2 different handwritings. One was clumsy, with mistakes. The letters were all over the place. The old Ujin. The second was neat, confident, expensive ink, not the kind from the village. He read all 7, slowly. His heart beat steadily. He didn't let it speed up. The content was simple and terrifying. The former Ujin had been corresponding with a man from Ash Ridge. No name, signed only with initials. 2 letters. The former Ujin was passing on information. When So-yeon went on raids, which routes, with whom, how many hunters were in the settlement, which of them could still work, who had completely given up, which rifts were nearby, what creatures were crawling out of them. He was paid for this. Not much, but enough to drink. One letter was worse than the rest. In it, the former Ujin reported that So-yeon was planning a raid on the eastern fault line, with 3 other hunters, the route through the gorge, departure time, at dawn, 2 days after the date of the letter. The reply was brief. Thanks. And a postscript. The route through the gorge is blocked. The ridge will carry out its operation there on the same day. If the independent hunters run into the ridge's group in the gorge, that will be their problem. Ujin sat on the floor, holding the letters. His hands weren't shaking. He'd made them stop shaking. He understood. The old Ujin didn't just drink and beat his wife. He sold her. Her routes, her safety, her life, for a bottle of moonshine and a few copper coins. She could have died in that gorge, could have run into Grebnia's fighters who didn't stand on ceremony with free hunters on their territory. She might not have come back. And then the old Ujin would have been left without a breadwinner and without a sacrifice, and would have had to find another way to survive. Or maybe not. Maybe he didn't care. He folded the letters, neatly, wrapped them back in the rag, put them on the table, sat down, closed his eyes. He thought. 2 options. The first, burn them. No one will find out. The old Ujin is dead. His soul, or whatever serves as a soul here, is gone. That man no longer exists. His betrayal will die with these letters. Soyeon won't find out. There will be no pain, no hatred. The fragile trust they'd built, brick by brick, over 8 months. Option 2. Show her. The truth. All of it. And accept whatever comes next. He sat and thought, and knew that the first option was easier and safer and wiser. And he knew he would choose the second, because he was a doctor. 20 years. And in 20 years, he had learned one thing that had nothing to do with surgery. A white lie doesn't save you. It poisons you. Slowly, over the years, like lead in water. You don't taste it, but your bones crumble. If he hides it and she finds out later, in a year, in 2, by accident, from someone else, or she finds out herself, then it won't just be her trust in the old Ujin that crumbles. Her trust in him will crumble. In the new him. In the one who promised to be different, but turned out to be just the same. Hiding things, lying, making decisions for her. He waited until evening. Soyeon came home from training, wet, tired. She trained every day. Kat pushed them mercilessly. Soyeon had grown stronger over these months. Her shoulder had healed completely. Her arms had grown stronger. She was a hunter again. Not the one she used to be, a different one. Better. Because now she knew why she had to survive. Before, she had survived because she didn't know how to die. Now, because there was something nearby worth living for. He placed the letters on the table. He said he had found them. Under the floorboards. He said the former Ujin had written them. He said she needed to read them. She picked up the first letter. She read slowly. She wasn't as literate as Ara, but she could read. She took the second one, the third. As she read, her face changed. First, confusion. Then, recognition. Then, coldness. Her face hardened. The muscles in her jaw tensed. Her eyes narrowed. She finished reading the last one. She placed it on the table, carefully, neatly, in a stack. Her hands didn't tremble. She stood up, walked over to the wall, turned her back. He waited. A minute, 2, 3. Silence. Then she punched the wall, once, hard. Her knuckles cracked. A red streak remained on the whitewash. He stood up, walked over, took her hand. She flinched, but didn't pull it away. He looked. The skin was scraped off 2 knuckles. No fracture, just an abrasion. He led her to the table, washed her hand, applied a bandage, a small one, neat. She sat and watched as he bandaged her hand and said nothing. Then she said there had been a raid in the gorge. A year and a half ago, the 4 of them went. In the gorge, they ran into Grebnia's squad, 8 fighters. The free hunters ran. 1 didn't make it. His name was Pyong Soo-ho, 20 years old. She said it without emotion, like a fact. Pyong Soo-ho, 20 years old. He didn't make it. She doesn't know what happened to him. Maybe they killed him. Maybe they captured him. Grebny doesn't report to the free hunters. She went home then. She yelled at her husband because she thought it was an accident. Bad luck. Just a bad day. But her husband sat there staring at her with empty eyes and said nothing. And she thought he was drunk. But he was silent because he knew. Because he had sold the root for a handful of coins. She spoke quietly, without shouting, without tears. Her voice was steady, like a thread stretched to its limit. Ujin listened and didn't interrupt. When she fell silent, he said 3 things. First, the old Ujin is to blame, without a doubt, completely. It's betrayal. Second, he himself is not the old Ujin, but he wears his face and lives in his house, and that means he bears his burden. Not guilt, burden. Third, The letters are her property. She decides what to do with them. Burn them, show them to others, take them to the authorities, use them as proof of Grebny's connection to informants. Whatever she wants, it's her right. She sat there for a long time. A very long time. The night was dark outside the window, and the oil lamp had almost burned out when she finally turned to him. She said she wouldn't burn them, that she would keep them, that the day would come when these letters would be useful. He nodded. Then she said one more thing. She said that he could have burned them and she would never have known, that he had the chance, that he had chosen the truth, that she would remember that. She got up and went to her room. He stayed. He sat in silence and listened as she breathed quietly and evenly behind the wall. Not sleeping, just breathing. An hour later, her breathing grew deeper. She had fallen asleep. He lay down on his mattress in the new back room, which he had just finished whitewashing today. The ceiling still smelled of lime. Fresh. Clean. He closed his eyes and thought that something had changed today. It hadn't gotten better. It hadn't gotten easier. But it had become more honest. And that is the only foundation on which one can build. Ujin finds hidden letters from the former Ujin that prove he was selling information about the routes of the Ash Ridge Guild to So-yun. Because of this betrayal, the young hunter Pyong Su-ho was lost. Ujin shows the letters to So-yun instead of destroying them. So-yun decides to keep the letters as future evidence of the Ridge's ties to informants. A new level of trust is established between them through honesty. A year. 365 days in a foreign body. Ujin stood on the roof of the sanatorium and looked at the village, which no longer looked like a graveyard. Quiet Haven had grown. Not to 3 stories, not yet. But they'd added an extension. 4 more beds, 7 in total. A separate operating room. Small, clean, whitewashed walls. A stone floor that Moonho had laid in 2 weeks. An operating table, sturdy, with leather straps for restraint. A shelf on the wall. Kiho's instruments. 3 scalpels, 4 clamps. Needles, tweezers, scissors. A trepanation kit that Kiho spent a month making and that looked like a torture device, but worked. Next to it, Aya's shelf. 32 vials, each labeled. Willow bark decoction. Alcohol tincture. Poppy extract. Healing ointment. And 4 vials of yellow liquid. Mold extract. An antibiotic. Rough, unpredictable, but effective. Over the past 3 months, Ara had refined the process to the point where 8 out of 10 batches yielded a usable extract. 2 out of 10 were useless. She didn't understand why. Ujin didn't either. But 8 out of 10 was a miracle. It was more than nothing. That morning, he was holding a class. The first official one. Not for Ara, not for So-yun, for the village, for everyone. 23 people sat in front of the clinic on logs, stones, and the ground. Men, women, children over 10 whom he had allowed because children remember better than adults. He stood before them with a piece of cloth on which hands were drawn. 2 hands. One dirty, drawn in black. The other clean, white. An arrow between them. A skull drawn next to the dirty hand. A flower next to the clean one. Primitive. Clear. He spoke slowly, in simple words. Wash your hands. Before eating. After using the restroom. Before touching a wound. Before touching a child. Boil water. Always. If a wound has become infected, don't wait. Go to the clinic. If a person has fallen and won't get up, don't move them. Call those who know. Ara stood next to the notebook and repeated his every word, louder, more confidently. She became his voice, his translator from the language of medicine into the language of people who had never heard the word infection. She came up with comparisons. Invisible creatures on your hands, like in the crevices, only smaller. Boiling water kills them. Soap washes them away. People listened, nodded, memorized. Some shook their heads, didn't believe it. Invisible creatures on your hands? Nonsense. Superstition in reverse. Ujin didn't argue. He just said, try it. 1 month. Wash your hands. Boil water. In a month, we'll count how many people got sick. Facts. Not faith. Facts. After class, a woman approached with a child, a boy of about 7. Skinny, pale, swollen belly. Big for such a skinny body. Ujin looked. He crouched down. He felt the belly. Soft, painless. Enlarged liver. Spleen, too. Yellowish eyes. He asked how long the boy had been like this. The mother said, since birth. That one healer said it was a curse. That another healer said it was a hereditary weakness. That a third had told them to pray. Ujin examined the boy more closely. The skin, mucous membranes, nails, palms, tongue. He asked the mother to describe what he eats, how he sleeps, how often he gets sick. She spoke and he listened, and a picture formed in his mind. Not a curse, not a hereditary weakness. Most likely parasites. Intestinal. Chronic. For years. Abdominal distension. Enlarged liver and spleen. Anemia. Stunted growth. Classic. He knew that in a world without lab tests and a microscope, an accurate diagnosis was impossible. But he could try treating the parasites. Among the plants Ara had gathered were 2 with antiparasitic properties: bitter root and pumpkin seeds. Pumpkin Brook, the name of the village. Pumpkins grew in every backyard here. The seeds contained cucurbitin, a substance that paralyzes certain types of helminths. Not a panacea, but a chance. He devised a treatment regimen. 2 weeks. A decoction of bitter root in the morning, pumpkin seeds ground into a paste in the afternoon. Clean water, lots of it. Light food, no meat. The mother listened and nodded and wrote down nothing because she couldn't write. Ara wrote it down for her, on a separate sheet. In large letters. Morning. Decoction. So many spoons. Afternoon. Seeds. So many. Water. So much. Mother treated the sheet like a sacred relic. 2 weeks later, she brought the boy back. His belly had shrunk, not completely, but noticeably. His complexion was slightly better. His eyes were slightly clearer. She said he had started eating. For the first time in a year, he asked for seconds. Ujin continued the treatment. 2 more weeks. By the end of the month, the boy was running around the village with the other children. Skinny, pale, but he was running. His mother stood by the clinic watching him, and on her face was that expression he knew, the one that was worth everything. The child is running, the mother is watching. The world isn't perfect, but the child is running. That evening, Kat came, with news. Bad news. She stood in the doorway of the clinic. Her face was hard. One eye was green and cold. She said her contact in lower threshold had passed it on. The comb was preparing an official charge. No pressure, no threats. An indictment through the temple. Heresy, forbidden practices, resurrecting the doomed. In the theology of this world, one marked by the rifts cannot be saved by a mortal, only by the will of the gods through consecrated healers. If a mortal saves the doomed, it means he draws power from the other side. It means he is a necromancer. That means he must be tried and burned. Ujin listened, calmly. He knew this would come. He knew from day one. When you heal those who have been written off, you're not undermining medicine. You're undermining theology, the economy, power. Everything built on the principle that a wounded hunter is a disposable item, not a human being. Kat said that the charges would be brought by Baek Son Ho himself, the guildmaster of Ashcrest. Personally. That means it's serious. That crest will invest resources, witnesses, gold for the right people in the temple. She said the trial would be in the regional capital in 3 months, maybe 4. The temple isn't in a hurry, but the verdict is a foregone conclusion unless they find a way to change it. Ujin asked what it would take to change it. Kat said they need the temple. They need someone on the inside who's willing to listen, who's willing to see. Someone who hasn't closed their eyes and ears with the comb's gold. Soyeon stood by the wall, silent, arms crossed. She was listening. Then she said one word. Letters. Ujin looked at her. She nodded. Letters from the former Ujin. Correspondence with a comb agent. Proof that the comb uses informants, that they pay for the roots of the free hunters, that people don't disappear by accident. This won't save him from the charge of heresy, but it will show the court who is really behind the accusation, and why. Not for the sake of faith, for the sake of control. Kat nodded. She said that was good, but not enough. We need more. We need witnesses, those whom Ujin cured. Every single one, alive, walking, talking. Over 30 people who were supposed to die and didn't. Let them stand up and speak. Let them show their scars. Let them bring the children who are growing up with living parents because one man in a barn with whitewashed walls knew that hands needed to be washed. Ujin nodded. He could do that. It was simple. Not because it was easy, because it was the truth. He had treated them. They had survived. Fact, not faith, not theology. Fact. They began to prepare. 3 months. Maybe 4. Kat took charge of the contacts, reaching out to the surviving patients, with the hunters from lower threshold, with the traders who had seen the clinic, with anyone who could confirm it. Ara took charge of the records, every surgical chart she had kept, every patient, name, date, diagnosis, what was done, result. Over 30 charts, detailed, accurate, with her neat handwriting and crooked but recognizable drawings of wounds and stitches. Soyeon took charge of security, doubled the training sessions, talked to people in the village. Quietly, no loud words. She just went from house to house and asked one thing. Do you remember what this village was like a year ago? And what it had become? People remembered. People nodded. Ujin took on the only thing he knew how to do. Heal. Every day, everyone who came, without stopping. Because the best defense is work that cannot be called a crime without making you look like a monster. By the anniversary, the clinic expands to 7 beds with a separate operating room. Ujin conducts the first educational sessions for the village. Ara brings the production of the mold-based antibiotic to a stable yield. Kat brings news that Ashcrest is preparing a heresy charge through the temple. The team begins preparing for trial by gathering patient testimonies and evidence of Ashcrest's activities. Layla al-Sabah arrived on a white horse, dressed in white with silver rings on every finger and an expression that spoke louder than any words. She had come to shut down the clinic. She was a priestess of the Temple of the Dawning Firmament, an investigator. She had been sent from the central temple in the regional capital to conduct a preliminary investigation before the trial, to gather facts, to interview witnesses, to write a report that would land on the chief hierarch's desk and determine the course of the trial. She was 30, calm, educated. She spoke 3 languages. She read 5. 15 years in the temple, since childhood, an orphan raised by temple mentors. She believed, sincerely, deeply. Faith was not a garment she wore. Faith was the skeleton upon which everything rested. She arrived, and Kat met her at the village gate, with one eye, a cane, and the words that if the priestess had come to burn people, she'd better turn around. Layla looked at her and said she had come not to burn, but to watch. Kat said she could watch, but she wouldn't let her touch anything. Layla nodded. She walked into the settlement. She stopped in front of the infirmary. She read the rules on the wall, all 12 of them, slowly, moving her lips. Then she turned to Kat and asked who had written them. Kat said a doctor's apprentice. Layla asked who the doctor was. Kat pointed to the door. Ujin was inside. He was changing the bandage on a hunter with a burn on his back. The creature from the rift had spat something hot. The healer had healed the skin on the surface. Underneath, the burn continued to destroy the tissue. Ujin cut it open, cleaned it out, treated it with mold extract. He was sewing when Layla walked in. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. His hands were busy. The needle was in the flesh. The thread was taut. The stitch had to lie flat. Layla stood and watched. A minute, 2, 5. He sewed, stitch by stitch, small, even, precise. The hunter lay still. Poppy extract. Not full anesthesia, but enough to keep him from twitching. Ujin finished, applied a bandage, washed his hands in a bowl of boiled water. He turned around, looked at Layla. She was looking at him, without hostility, without approval, with that expression he knew from hospital committees, professional interest, cold, appraising. She introduced herself, said why she had come. She said she would spend as much time in Pumpkin Ford as necessary, that she would talk to everyone, to the patients, to the residents, to him, that everything she saw and heard would go into the report. He nodded, said she could start right away, that he had nothing to hide. She began. For 3 days she walked around the village. She talked. With Moonho, who showed her a scar on his stomach and told her how he'd been lying on the door and how he'd woken up alive on the kitchen table. With Kihyo, who bent and straightened his right arm 5 times in a row and said that 4 months ago he couldn't hold a spoon. With the boy's mother, who cried and said her son was running. With Yunho, who lifted her shirt and showed a scar running from her sternum to her navel and said she'd been on the table for 3 hours and now here she was, standing. With a dozen others, each told their story. Each showed scars, arms, legs, eyes, living children. Living husbands and wives, themselves alive. Layla listened. She took notes. On the 4th day, she came to the clinic. She asked Ujin to explain what he was doing. Not a specific procedure. In general, the gist of it. He thought about how to put it. He couldn't say, "I'm a surgeon from another world." He couldn't say, "I know anatomy and microbiology and pharmacology." He couldn't use words that didn't exist here. He said this: the human body is structured in a certain way. It has parts, bones, muscles, veins through which blood flows, organs inside. Every part performs a function. When a part is damaged, it can be repaired. with hands, with tools. If you know how it's built and what happened to it. It's not magic, it's knowledge. Like a blacksmith knows metal, like a carpenter knows wood. He knows the body. Layla listened. Then she asked where this knowledge came from. He repeated what Soyan had said, that after his illness, things appeared in his head that hadn't been there before, that he couldn't explain it, that he could only show her. She looked at him, and he could see she didn't believe him. Not in his skill, in his explanation. She was smart. She could see he wasn't telling the whole story. But she was also honest. She saw the result. Over 30 people, alive. She asked if she could watch an operation. He said she could, if the opportunity arose. The opportunity presented itself the next day. They brought in a hunter from a caravan that had been passing through Pumpkin Ford on the southern route. A man in his 40s. He'd fallen from the wagon, broken both bones in his forearm, an open fracture. The bone was sticking out of the skin. Blood, pain, screams. His companions were in a panic. The healer traveling with the caravan was there, but refused. He said an open fracture was a death sentence, that the arm had to be amputated before the infection spread further up. Ujin took a look. Fractures of the radius and ulna, displacement, but the blood vessels were intact. There was a pulse at the wrist. The fingers moved. The nerve was intact. This arm could be saved. He asked to be taken to the infirmary. Layla stood by the wall. White robes, silver rings, attentive eyes. He worked. Poppy extract, pain relief, wound irrigation, boiled water, poppy extract, reduction, with both hands. Soyan held his shoulder. He pulled and rotated. The bones snapped back into place. Not perfectly, but they were set. Splint, made of wood. Moonho had carved them in advance, several sizes, for different limbs. They were ready. F. Immobilization. Bandage. A stitch in the skin. Small. Even. 40 minutes. The hunter lay there, breathing heavily, and looked at his hand. Unharmed. In place. His fingers moved. He cried. A 40-year-old man cried because he'd been told his hand would be amputated, but instead they'd fixed it. Layla stood by the wall and watched, and there was something on her face that Ujin hadn't seen before. Not interest, not judgment, confusion. The confusion of a person who for 15 years had believed that saving the doomed was the work of the gods, and suddenly saw a man do it with a red-hot needle and a piece of wood. That evening she came to him, alone, without a scroll, without a quill, not as an investigator, as a person. She sat down across from him. She was silent for a long time. Then she said she had a problem. He asked what kind. She said she had seen enough, that her report must be damning, that the temple was waiting for confirmation of heresy, that Greben had paid for a specific outcome, that if she wrote the truth, her career in the temple would be over, that if she wrote a lie, she herself would be finished. As a person, as a believer, as someone who had spent 15 years searching for the truth and suddenly found it, not in the temple's texts, but in a whitewashed shed that smelled of alcohol tincture, where a man with foreign eyes sewed up wounds with a crooked needle. Ujin listened. Then he asked one thing. He asked what her text said about healing. She thought. She quoted, not verbatim, in essence. The temple canon said that healing is a gift from above, and that the healer's hands are an extension of the will of heaven. He nodded. Then he asked, if the healer's hands are an extension of the will of heaven, if healing is a gift, then why must the gift be only magical? Why can't knowledge be a gift? Why can't skill be will? Why are a surgeon's hands worse than a magician's if the result is the same? A living person. She looked at him. He could see her mind working behind her eyes, quickly, deeply. 15 years of theological education were being reorganized in real time. She didn't answer. She stood up. She left. She didn't show up for 3 days. She sat in the room they'd assigned her in the headman's house. She wrote. Ujin didn't disturb her. Ara was dying to go and ask. He told her to wait. Kat said that if the priestess wrote an accusation, they'd burn the report and drive her out of the village. Ujin said they wouldn't, that they'd let her write whatever she wrote. That if the truth doesn't work, nothing works. On the 4th day, Layla came out, with a folder, a thick one. She approached Ujin, placed the folder on the table, said the report was ready, that she had described everything she saw, every operation, every patient, every fact, and that in her conclusion she wrote that she found no signs of heresy, that she discovered a healing practice based on knowledge of the body's structure, that this practice does not contradict the temple canon because the canon does not limit forms of healing, that if knowledge is a gift, then the use of knowledge is service. Ujin took the folder, opened it. He leafed through it, thoroughly, accurately, every fact in its place, no lies, no embellishments, just the truth, written by the hand of a person who knew how to record the truth. He closed the folder. He looked at her. He said thank you. She shook her head. She said it was nothing, that she had just done her job. Then she paused and said she wanted to stay. He wasn't surprised. He had seen it in her eyes for the past 3 days, the same look Ara had had when she first heard about the invisible beings on her hands, the same look Kat when she woke up without a headache for the first time in 4 months, the look of someone who had found a place where questions were not forbidden. He said she could stay as long as she wanted. She nodded. She took off the silver rings. She placed them on the table, one by one. 10 rings, 10 years of service. 1 ring for every year after the 5th. Then she said she no longer needed the rings, that her faith remained,